The rain lashed against the towering glass walls of the Ivory Lux Hotel, a shimmering monument to wealth in the heart of downtown Chicago. The storm was merciless. Each drop a relentless hammer against a sleek, modern facade, the sound a dull roar that seemed to echo the tension brewing inside. Streetlights flickered outside, their pale, wavering glow casting jagged, restless shadows across the polished marble lobby. Overhead, chandeliers hung like constellations, their golden light refracting through crystal prisms, bathing the room in a warm, almost ethereal glow. Yet at 9:47 p.m., the lobby was anything but serene. It was a battlefield, charged with unspoken accusations and simmering conflict. At the center of it stood a woman, her tailored coat drenched from the downpour, water pooling at her feet in small, dark puddles. Her posture was unshaken, her presence a quiet defiance against the chaos swirling around her. Her name was Dr. Amara Sterling, though the man behind the front desk, with his smug certainty, had no inkling of who she was. To him, she was an anomaly, an unwelcome disruption in the carefully curated world of his hotel. "Ma'am, I've told you twice," Greg Thornton, the front desk manager, snapped, his voice cutting through the storm's rumble like a blade. His eyes raked over her, lingering on her dark skin, the natural curls that peeked out from the damp scarf framing her face. His lips twisted into a smirk, a silent verdict already passed. She was lost, or worse, trespassing in a place where she didn't belong. "This is a private establishment," he continued, his tone heavy with the authority he'd spent years cultivating. "You need to leave, or I'm calling security." His words carried the weight of someone who'd long decided who was worthy of the Ivory Lux's opulence, and in his mind, Amara clearly wasn't. Amara adjusted her glasses, the lenses catching the chandelier's light, as she met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was low, resonant, like a cello string plucked in a hushed room, steady and deliberate. "I'd like to speak to the general manager. Now." Her words were polite, almost soft, but beneath them lay a quiet challenge, a spark that made the air feel heavier, charged with something unspoken. Greg's laugh was cold, dismissive, echoing off the marble walls like a slap. "Lady, you're not speaking to anyone. You're leaving." He snapped his fingers, a sharp, imperious gesture, and two security guards stepped forward, their radios crackling with static, amplifying the tension in the room. The lobby fell silent, as if the storm outside had paused to watch. Guests froze mid-step, their eyes drawn to the scene. A businessman in a tailored suit, seated in a corner with his phone, looked up, his fingers hovering over the screen. Curiosity piqued. A couple near the lounge, dressed in evening wear, exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers barely audible but sharp with unease. The air was thick, the moment teetering on the edge of something irreversible. What Greg didn't know, what no one in that gleaming chandelier-lit lobby could have possibly guessed, was that Amara Sterling wasn't just a guest. She was the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, the conglomerate that owned the Ivory Lux and a network of luxury properties spanning the country. She'd built an empire from nothing, her name synonymous with power and precision in the hospitality world. Tonight, she walked into her own hotel not as a titan of industry, but as a test, a shadow moving through her own creation to see if it upheld the standard she'd set. In 9 minutes, this lobby, this moment, this entire night would be rewritten, and the Ivory Lux would be transformed forever. The lobby was a stage, and Amara Sterling was its quiet, unassuming star. At 38, she carried herself with a grace forged in fire, each movement deliberate, each glance weighted with purpose. She'd earned a Ph.D. from Wharton at 25, a feat that silenced skeptics, and opened doors she'd later kicked down herself. By 30, she was a self-made millionaire, her hospitality empire built on a foundation of grit and brilliance. Every milestone in her life was a defiance of the doubts, the dismissals, the whispered judgments she'd faced since childhood. Tonight, though, she wasn't here as a CEO. She'd come incognito, her reservation booked under her initials, her appearance carefully understated. A tailored coat that spoke of wealth but didn't scream it, a scarf to shield her from the rain, glasses that lent her an air of quiet authority. She'd heard whispers of guest complaints, reports of uneven service at her flagship hotel, and she wanted to see the truth for herself. She wanted to know what her staff did when they thought no one important was watching. Greg Thornton, 45, was her antithesis in every way. His pressed suit and polished name tag screamed authority, but his arrogance was louder, a beacon of self-assured superiority that radiated from him like heat. He'd spent a decade at the Ivory Lux, climbing from bellhop to front desk manager, each promotion inflating his sense of ownership over the hotel. To him, the Ivory Lux was his kingdom, its guest subject to his judgment, his rules. His biases weren't subtle. His eyes lingered too long on Amara's dark skin. His tone carried a condescension reserved for those he deemed out of place. He didn't see a guest. He saw someone who didn't fit his narrow vision of the hotel's clientele, and he was determined to enforce that vision. Flanking Greg were the security guards, Mike and Javier, their presence like bookends to his authority. Mike, older, with graying hair and a weathered face, moved with a reluctance that suggested he'd seen too many nights like this. His hand hovered over his radio, as if unsure whether to act or retreat. Javier, younger, with a cocky tilt his head and a smirk that mirrored Greg's, was eager to prove his loyalty, his eyes gleaming with a chance to assert his power. In the background, the lobby's other players watched, a businessman in a tailored suit, his phone now idle as he studied the unfolding drama. A couple in their 50s, their whispers growing sharper, tinged with disapproval at the scene before them. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every word, every glance, a storm brewing within the storm outside. Greg leaned forward, his voice thick with mockery, each syllable a calculated jab designed to wound. "Look, ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't a shelter. You can't just walk in here demanding things." He gestured to the guards, his hand slicing through the air like a blade. "Escort her out." Amara didn't flinch. She reached into her bag with deliberate calm, her movements slow and precise, pulling out a sleek black card embossed with the Ivory Lux's logo, her key to the penthouse suite. "This is my reservation," she said, her voice steady, holding the card out like a challenge. "Check it." Greg snorted, snatching the card with a flick of his wrist, his confidence unshaken. He swiped it through the system, his smirk faltering as the screen flashed green, the words unmistakable, penthouse suite, reserved for A. Sterling. His brow furrowed, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard, as if the machine had betrayed him. This must be a mistake," he muttered, swiping again, slower this time, as if willing the system to correct itself. The screen held firm, the confirmation glowing like a silent rebuke, unyielding in its truth. "Run it again." Greg snapped at the clerk beside him, a young woman named Emily, her hands trembling as she hovered over the keyboard. Emily's eyes darted between Greg and Amara, her face pale, caught in the crossfire of a moment she couldn't fully grasp. It's valid, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lobby, her words a quiet bombshell that shifted the air. Greg's face reddened, his jaw tightening as he tossed the card back at Amara, letting it clatter onto the counter with a dismissive flick. "I don't care what the system says. You don't belong here." His words were a challenge, a line drawn in the sand, daring her to cross it. "Get her out. Now." Mike stepped forward, his movement slow, his voice softer than Greg's, tinged with hesitation. "Ma'am, let's just—" "I'm not going anywhere," Amara interrupted, her tone like steel wrapped in velvet, unyielding yet composed, a quiet storm of resolve. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with precision as she tapped the screen, pulling up a document that glowed with authority. "You're making a mistake, Greg. A big one." The guests in the lobby shifted, their unease palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The businessman in the corner stopped typing, his eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold, his phone now poised as if sensing a story. The couple's whispers grew louder, one of them muttering, "This is ridiculous." Their tone sharp with indignation, their disapproval aimed not at Amara but at the man behind the counter. Greg's confidence flickered, a crack in his armor, but he doubled down, his voice rising, a desperate edge creeping in. "You got 5 seconds before I call the police." Amara's lips curved into a faint smile, a glint of something dangerous in her eyes, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You won't need to," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. I've already called someone. The elevator dinged, a sharp, piercing sound that cut to the tension like a knife through silk. Out stepped Jameson Carter, the hotel's general manager, his crisp suit immaculate, but his face pale, his eyes darting between Greg and Amara as if sensing the storm he'd walked into. He was Greg's boss, a detail Greg hadn't considered when he'd sneered about the general manager, and his presence shifted the dynamic, the air growing heavier still. "What's going on here?" Jameson asked, his voice tight, his hands clasped in front of him as if bracing for impact. Greg straightened, puffing out his chest, his confidence returning like a mask slipping back into place, those fraying at the edges. "This woman's causing a scene, sir," he said, his tone a mix of indignation and bravado. "She's claiming a penthouse reservation, but—" "It's not a claim," Amara said coolly, her voice cutting through Greg's bluster like a blade through fog. She held up her phone, the screen displaying email confirmation for the penthouse suite, time-stamped and legitimate. The Sterling Enterprises logo unmistakable in the header, a symbol of power Greg couldn't ignore. "I booked it myself." Jameson's eyes widened, his breath catching as he recognized the email's format, a direct communication from the corporate office, a level of authority far above his own. He took the phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he scanned the screen, his face paling further with every word he read. He looked at Greg, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension. "You verified this?" "It's a glitch," Greg insisted, his voice rising, a hint of desperation creeping in, his hands clenching at his sides. "She doesn't." "Check the system again," Jameson ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the gravity of the moment. Emily complied, her fingers shaking as she pulled up the reservation once more, the screen flashing the same confirmation. A. Sterling Penthouse Suite, VIP status. Greg's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he searched for an excuse. Any excuse to regain control. "This doesn't make sense." She's what?" Amara's voice was a quiet blade, sharp and precise, cutting through the noise with surgical precision. "Say it, Greg. I want to hear you say it." The lobby fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Every eye locked on the confrontation. Mike, the older guard, stepped back, his hand dropping from his radio, his face a mix of unease and respect, as if he sensed the tide turning. Javier's smirk had vanished, his eyes flicking to Greg for guidance. Finding none, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the moment. The businessman in the corner was now filming, his phone's red light glowing like a silent accusation, capturing every word, every gesture, the lens a witness to the unfolding drama. Jameson handed the phone back to Amara, his face ashen, his voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the realization of what was happening. "Ms. Sterling, I'm so sorry. There's been a misunderstanding." "It's Dr. Sterling," she corrected, her voice calm but unyielding, each syllable a deliberate assertion of her identity, a reclaiming of her power. "And this isn't a misunderstanding. It's discrimination." Greg laughed, a nervous, brittle sound that echoed in the silent lobby, a desperate attempt to cling to his crumbling authority. "Discrimination? That's absurd. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Amara stepped closer, her presence filling the room, her eyes locked on Greg's, unblinking, unrelenting. "Your job is to welcome guests, not to profile them." "I'm not just a guest, Greg. I'm Amara Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises. This hotel? It's mine." The words landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the lobby, shaking the foundation of Greg's world. He froze, his mouth half open, his eyes darting as if searching for a lifeline, a way to undo the moment, to rewrite the reality crashing down around him. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, tears glistening as she processed the weight of Amara's revelation. Jameson's shoulders slumped, his face a mass of dread, his hands clenching at his sides as he realized the magnitude of the mistake. The guests in the lobby murmured, their voices a low hum of astonishment, the businessman's phone still recording, capturing every second of Greg's unraveling, the red light a silent judge. You can't be," Greg stammered, his voice cracking, his confidence crumbling like dry sand underfoot. "That's not." It's on the website, Amara said, her tone icy, each word a nail in the coffin of Greg's authority, driven with precision and purpose. Sterling Enterprises owns the Ivory Lux. I came here tonight to see how my staff treats guests when they think no one's watching. And you, Greg, just show me exactly who you are. Amara turned to Jameson, her voice steady but laced with an authority that brooked no dissent, a quiet power that filled the room. Effective immediately, Greg Thornton is terminated. So is anyone who stood by and let this happen. Her gaze swept to Javier, who flinched as if struck, his bravado gone, his shoulders hunching under the weight of her words. She glanced at Emily, who looked away, tears glistening in her eyes, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. I want the entire front desk staff replaced by morning. Understood. Jameson nodded, his voice barely audible, his hands trembling as he struggled to meet her gaze. Yes, Dr. Sterling, he said, his words heavy with resignation, knowing the night had changed everything. Greg's face twisted into a mask of fury and disbelief, his voice rising in a desperate, almost frantic plea. You can't do this. I've been here 10 years. You have no proof. His hands gestured wildly, as if he could push back the tide of Amara's authority with sheer force of will. I have witnesses, Amara said, her gesture encompassing the guests, who were now openly staring, their faces a mix of shock and approval, some nodding in silent agreement. I have security footage, and I have the authority to fire anyone who disrespects my guests or me. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the silent lobby, each word a quiet condemnation, sharp and unyielding. You thought I didn't belong here. Now you don't. The businessman in the corner stopped recording, his face lit with a grin, his phone lowered as he nodded in approval, as if he just witnessed justice itself take form. The couple near the lounge applauded softly, their claps echoing in the vast lobby, a quiet chorus of support that seemed to reverberate off the marble walls. Mike, the older guard, gave Amara a small nod, a gesture of respect that carried more weight than words, his eyes conveying a quiet acknowledgement of her strength. Javier looked like he wanted to vanish, his bravado gone, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor as if it could swallow him whole. By 9:56 p.m., Greg and Javier were escorted out by Mike, who'd been spared after offering Amara a quiet, sincere apology, his voice low and genuine as he expressed regret for his part in the scene. Jameson stood by the desk, his hands still shaking, his face pale as he promised a full investigation and new staff training and inclusivity by week's end, his words tumbling out in a rush to appease the woman who held his career in her hands. Amara nodded, her expression unreadable, her key card now firmly in her hand as she stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft chime that marked the end of the confrontation, a final note in the symphony of the night. The lobby buzzed with whispers as the guests dispersed, some already typing furiously on their phones, posting about the incident, their fingers racing to capture the moment before it slipped away. By morning, the businessman's video will be trending. Tag #Justice for the Lux, the story spreading like wildfire across social media, shared and reshared by thousands who saw in it a spark of hope, a stand against injustice. Amara didn't care about the attention, didn't seek the spotlight. She'd come to test her hotel, to see if it lived up to the values she built her empire on: respect, dignity, excellence. And she found exactly what she needed to fix. As she stood in her penthouse suite, the city skyline glittering to the floor-to-ceiling windows, Amara let out a long breath, the tension of the night finally easing from her shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the night was clear, the stars sharp against the velvet dark, each one a pinpoint of light in the vastness. She thought of every moment she'd been underestimated, every room where eyes had lingered too long, every assumption that she didn't belong. She thought of her childhood, the daughter of immigrants who worked double shifts to give her a chance, the teachers who doubted her, the colleagues who dismissed her, the world that tried to tell her she wasn't enough. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, about ensuring no guest, no person, ever felt the sting of dismissal in a place she'd built to welcome them. This wasn't just one night, one lobby, one arrogant manager. It was every slight, every barrier, every whispered judgment that had shaped her, forged her into the woman who stood here now, unbowed and unbroken. She'd built an empire on the belief that respect wasn't a privilege. It was a right, a fundamental truth that every person deserved, no matter who they were or where they came from. The ivory lux was her creation, a testament to her vision, and she'd make sure it reflected that truth, not just in Chicago, but in every property she owned, every corner of her empire. She'd rewrite the rules, retrain the staff, rebuild the culture, because this was her legacy and she protected with everything she had. The screen fades to black, the words appearing in stark white text, glowing against the darkness. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, or justice, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that matter.